The door clicked shut at 9:50 p.m. Inside the Tucson warmth, 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie set her alarm, unaware that the air around her was already thinning. By dawn, the house was a hollow shell.
There are these tunnels that go beneath Tucson and are in the area where Nancy lives, in the foothills. They go under roadways, they go under neighborhoods. They're drainage tunnels when there's a lot of rain in the area, but right now they're totally empty.
No broken glass, no struggle, just an impossible silence. She hadn't just walked out. She had been pulled into a void that modern technology couldn't see. The world woke up to a nightmare.
Since Nancy Guthrie vanished, the investigation is entering something of a new phase. The FBI is now finished collecting evidence from her home, but still painstakingly perusing as many as 10,000 hours of video.
Wondering how a grandmother could vanish into a tunnel of shadows. The blind spot. The tunnel wasn't built from brick, mortar, or the hardened Arizona caliche. It was an architecture of intent, a psychological and digital corridor, constructed long before the first foot ever stepped onto Nancy's property. In the high desert quiet of Tucson, the tunnel became the only way to describe the impossible vacuum that swallowed an 84-year-old woman whole. It was the ultimate blind spot in a world that prides itself on being hyper-observed. We live in an era where we believe every inch of our lives is mapped, tracked, and uploaded. Yet Nancy Guthrie walked into a darkness that the digital grid simply couldn't account for. To the FBI, this tunnel was a sequence of deliberate, dark zones. Imagine a neighborhood where every home is a fortress of ring cameras, Nest sensors, and smart locks. Now, imagine a predator who maps those overlapping fields of vision like a sonar operator. They found the one path where the infrared beams didn't cross, the one fence line where the neighbor's floodlight died, and the exact 100-minute window where the digital grid flickered. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. It was a subterranean crawl through the habits of a grandmother. It was a masterpiece of cold, calculated isolation, designed to bypass the very technology we trust to keep us safe. The shock that eventually rippled outward wasn't about a hidden room under a basement floor or a physical passage through the dirt. It was the realization of how deeply the predator had tunneled into Nancy's private reality. They knew the 9:50 p.m. click of the deadbolt. They knew the specific frequency to jam the Wi-Fi signal at 1:47 a.m., causing the cameras to blink just long enough for a shadow to pass. This was a structural failure of safety. We build our lives around the idea that we are seen. But the tunnel proved that if someone studies the light long enough, they can master the dark. They don't need to break a window if they can break the signal. Inside this metaphorical tunnel, Nancy Guthrie wasn't just a victim. She was a ghost in a machine that had been hacked. The kidnapper didn't need a shovel to bury the truth. They used the tunnel of encrypted apps and burner signals to move her through the city like a whisper. When the FBI finally opened this tunnel, they didn't find a physical passage with a door. They found a chillingly professional blueprint of a life dismantled from the inside out. They found a predator who didn't just break into a house, they tunneled into a soul, learning the rhythm of her heart and the silence of her street. The public wanted a secret passage because a physical tunnel can be filled with concrete. It can be closed, mapped, and understood. But the tunnel the FBI actually uncovered was a haunting reminder that the most dangerous paths are the ones we can't see until we're already inside them. It was the space between the goodnight text and the morning's empty bed. It was a void where the rules of physics seemed to bend, allowing a person to evaporate. By the time the investigation began, the tunnel was already collapsing behind them, leaving the authorities to sift through the digital dust of a ghost. This was the secret they finally opened. It wasn't a hole in the ground, it was a hole in the American dream of security. It was the discovery that no matter how many locks we turn or how many cameras we install, there are those who know how to walk beneath the floorboards of our perception. Nancy didn't just vanish, she was archived. Now, to understand the tunnel, we have to look at the woman who was forced into it. She's too old to be lost, actually. The midnight disconnect. Nancy was a creature of comfort and clockwork. At 84, her life was a series of gentle, predictable rhythms that anchored her to the world. She liked her tea at 7, her news at 8, and her doors locked by 9. To those who knew her, she was the steady heartbeat of a family that lived under the relentless glare of the public eye. But on the night of February 1st, 2026, that rhythm was hijacked. The disconnect didn't happen all at once. It was a slow, surgical dismantling of her presence. It started with the garage door, a heavy, mechanical yawn that closed at 9:50 p.m., sealing her inside what she believed was a sanctuary. By 10:30 p.m., the interior lights of the Tucson home dimmed. Nancy was a woman who prepared for tomorrow. Her outfit for the next day was likely already laid out, her glasses resting on the nightstand. She was the picture of a quiet American life, yet she was being watched through a lens she couldn't see. The disconnect became literal at 1:47 a.m. This is the moment the investigation centers on, the moment the digital pulse of the house flatlined. The Wi-Fi router, the silent guardian of the modern home, experienced a localized blackout. It wasn't a power failure. It was a signal jam, a deliberate severance of the house from the cloud. When the connection dropped, the house became an island. The doorbell camera, which had spent the night staring blankly at the desert scrub, went blind. The motion sensors in the hallway ceased to report. In that artificial darkness, the predator moved. They didn't need to force a window. They had already tunneled through the security codes, likely obtained through a sophisticated phishing scheme or a man-in-the-middle attack on the home's network. Nancy, likely asleep, never heard the phantom footsteps. She was a woman who trusted the world, living in a house that had been programmed to betray her. The physical disappearance was as clean as the digital one. There was no sign of a struggle in the bedroom, no overturned lamp, no blood on the sheets. It was as if she had simply evaporated. The kidnapper didn't just take a person, they took a timeline. By the time her family realized she was missing the next morning, the trail was already cold. The midnight disconnect had provided a 6-hour head start. In that window, the predator had navigated her through the tunnel of side streets and unmonitored alleys, moving with a confidence that suggested they had rehearsed this exit 1,000 times in their mind. What makes this part of the mystery so haunting is the mundane nature of the evidence left behind. A half-empty glass of water, a book with a bookmark halfway through a chapter. These are the artifacts of a life interrupted. The FBI technicians who swarmed the house days later found themselves looking at a crime scene that felt more like a stage set where the lead actress had simply walked off script. The disconnect wasn't just technical, it was emotional. It was the moment the safety net of a prominent family was proven to be made of glass. As the sun rose over the Santa Catalina Mountains on February 2nd, the world still thought Nancy Guthrie was waking up to her morning tea. In reality, she was already deep within the void. The predator had successfully transitioned her from a living person to a case file. They had bypassed the cameras, the locks, and the community's watchful eyes. They had turned a home into a vacuum. The house was empty, but it wasn't silent. It was screaming with digital footprints. The FBI steps into the dark. When the FBI's Phoenix field office descended upon the Catalina foothills, they didn't just bring badges. They brought a clinical, cold-eyed methodology designed to dissect a disappearance. By the morning of February 2nd, the quiet, hilly neighborhood was no longer a retirement haven. It was a high-stakes forensic laboratory. The agents who stepped through Nancy Guthrie's front door were entering a crime scene that defied traditional logic. There was no shattered glass, no mud-tracked carpet, and no obvious sign of a struggle. Instead, there was something much more unsettling, a series of calculated absences. The federal response was immediate and massive. While the Pima County Sheriff's Department handled the local perimeter, the Bureau's Evidence Response Team, ERT, began the painstaking process of lighting up the tunnel the predator had used. They weren't just looking for fingerprints, they were hunting for the invisible. Technicians deployed signal sniffers to sweep the property, attempting to find any lingering trace of the jamming device that had severed the home's Wi-Fi at 1:47 a.m. They were looking for a digital shadow left behind by the intruder's own equipment. In the modern age, a kidnapper's greatest weapon is their tech. But that same tech often leaves a microscopic breadcrumb trail of pings and handshakes with local cell towers. As the days bled into weeks, the investigation moved from the bedroom to the desert scrub. The FBI's search and rescue teams, bolstered by U.S. Customs and Border Protection drones and K-9 units, began a grid search that felt more like an archaeological dig. They weren't just looking for Nancy. They were looking for the Black Ozark Trail backpack, a 25-liter hiker pack sold exclusively at Walmart that the masked intruder had been seen wearing in the brief, dying moments of the doorbell camera's life. This backpack became a focal point of the federal hunt. It was a common item, a piece of mass-market utility, yet in the context of the desert, it was a beacon of potential DNA. Then came the discovery that shifted the energy of the entire operation. Roughly 2 miles from Nancy's home, in a field near a dusty roadside, a search team recovered a black glove. It wasn't just any glove, it appeared to match the pair worn by the armed individual captured on the Nest camera. The forensic tension in the FBI's Quantico lab reached a fever pitch as they extracted a DNA profile of an unidentified male from the fabric. This was the smoking gun the public had been clamoring for, a physical piece of the predator. But the shock the world felt when the FBI opened this lead was the shock of a dead end. The profile was run through CODIS, the national database of millions of offenders, and it returned nothing. This is where the FBI's work enters the realm of the dark. When the database fails, the investigators have to turn to more creative, often controversial methods. They began looking into investigative genetic genealogy, the same tool used to catch the Golden State Killer, searching commercial databases like Ancestry and 23andMe for a distant cousin, a sibling, or a father of the man who left his skin cells on that glove. They were trying to build a family tree for a ghost. Meanwhile, specialists from the FBI's Operational Technology Division worked to bypass the no-subscription hurdle of Nancy's security system, hoping that even without a cloud backup, the local hardware might have cached a few more frames of the intruder's face. The pressure on the agents was suffocating. This wasn't just any missing person case. This was the mother of a national icon, Nancy Guthrie. Every lead was scrutinized by a global audience. When bloodstains were found near the entrance of the home, the lab worked around the clock to confirm it was Nancy's. It was. The realization that she had been injured before being taken added a layer of frantic urgency to the hunt. She was 84, she had a pacemaker, and she was without her daily heart medication. The FBI wasn't just looking for a kidnapper, they were racing against a biological clock. By late February, the FBI began a final sweep of the residence. They had analyzed over 23,000 tips. They had reviewed footage from every Walmart in the Southwest that had sold an Ozark Trail backpack in the last 6 months. They had mapped every tunnel of escape the predator could have taken through the Catalina foothills. The house, once a sanctuary, was now a hollowed-out shell of evidence bags and luminol traces. The FBI had stepped into the dark, and what they found was a predator who didn't just understand the law. They understood the silence of the desert. Even with the best tech in the world, the most chilling evidence came from a piece of paper. The ransom and the rabbit hole. When the first ransom note arrived, it didn't come through a clandestine drop-off or a muffled phone call in the middle of the night. It arrived as a digital intrusion, sliding into the inboxes of major media outlets like TMZ and local Arizona news stations. This was the first time the world truly saw the depth of the tunnel. The kidnappers weren't just hiding in the physical desert, they were operating from the high ground of the digital age. They demanded $6 million in Bitcoin, a figure so specific and staggering that it signaled a predator who had calculated the exact price of a national icon's peace of mind. The notes were chillingly clinical. They didn't use the frantic cut-out magazine letter tropes of the past. Instead, they were written with a cold, terrifying authority. One message graphically described the consequences if the ransom wasn't paid, while another claimed that Nancy was safe but scared and fully aware of the demands being made for her life. This was psychological warfare. By bypassing the family and going straight to the press, the abductors forced the Guthrie family to negotiate in the town square. It turned a private tragedy into a public auction. The FBI, meanwhile, was forced to play a game of forensic whack-a-mole, trying to trace cryptocurrency addresses that were designed to be untraceable. But as the investigation deepened, the ransom demands began to reveal a darker, more chaotic rabbit hole. Not all the notes were real. On February 5th, federal agents arrested a California man who had tried to capitalize on the family's desperation by sending imposter ransom messages. This is the reality of a high-profile kidnapping in 2026. The tunnel becomes crowded with vultures. For every credible lead the FBI followed, they had to sift through 1,000 digital hoaxes. The family was left in a state of agonizing uncertainty, forced to ask themselves if the voice on the other end of the screen was the person holding their mother, or just a grifter looking for a payday. The most haunting moment came on February 7th, when Savannah Guthrie released a video statement that felt like a prayer whispered into a hurricane. "We received your message," she said, her voice steady, but her eyes betraying a month of sleeplessness. "We understand. We will pay." It was a total surrender to the kidnappers' terms, a desperate attempt to bridge the gap between her mother and the world. Yet, as the February 9th deadline approached and passed, the Bitcoin wallet remained largely stagnant. There was no exchange. No proof of life was provided. The tunnel had swallowed the money as easily as it had swallowed Nancy. This area of the case highlights the unique cruelty of modern abduction. The kidnappers used the gray web, a space between the surface internet and the dark web, to taunt the authorities. They moved the search from the physical hills of Tucson to the border of Mexico, suggesting she had been taken across the line. The FBI's cyber division worked around the clock to analyze the metadata of the emails, looking for a fingerprint in the code, but they found a predator who practiced perfect digital hygiene. Every time the investigators thought they had reached the end of the rabbit hole, they found another layer of encryption. As the weeks dragged on, the motive began to blur. Was it really about the 6 million? Or was the ransom just another dark zone in the tunnel, designed to keep the FBI looking at blockchain data while the predator moved Nancy through the physical world? The rabbit hole wasn't just a place where the truth was hidden. It was a place where the truth was actively being dismantled. The family, now offering a 1 million reward of their own, was left clinging to a miracle while the digital trail grew colder by the hour. The ransom hadn't bought her freedom. It had only bought more silence. As the days turned into weeks, the search moved from the desert scrub to the darkest corners of the human mind. The global eye. For a long time, the tragedy of Nancy Guthrie was a quiet, desert-born mystery. But that changed the moment the world realized whose mother had been taken. Suddenly, the search was no longer just a federal investigation. It was a global event, broadcasted into millions of living rooms every morning. The weight of the global eye is a unique burden in modern crime. When Savannah Guthrie, a face synonymous with the morning news, stepped away from her desk to become the lead story, the tunnel of the investigation was flooded with 1 million flashlights, some helpful, many blinding. The pressure of being at the center of a national manhunt is a special kind of agony. For Savannah and her siblings, Annie and Cameron, the privacy required to grieve or negotiate was stripped away. Every video appeal they posted on Instagram was analyzed by millions for telltale signs of deception or despair. This is the double-edged sword of the digital age. The same attention that kept Nancy's face on every billboard also invited a wave of amateur sleuths who began to clog the FBI's tip lines. Over 50,000 calls flooded the Pima County Sheriff's Department, ranging from legitimate sightings to wild theories born in the dark corners of the internet. This section of the case explores the digital entourage that follows a high-profile kidnapping. While the FBI worked the forensics, YouTubers and pink slime news sites began their own investigations. Some set up 24-hour live streams outside Nancy's home, turning a crime scene into a reality show. They clashed with neighbors, argued with police, and speculated on the family's involvement without a shred of evidence. The sheriff was eventually forced to take the podium not to announce a lead, but to defend the Guthrie family against the cruelty of the internet, reminding a global audience that sometimes we forget we're human. The global gaze also reached across the border. As the search entered its third and fourth weeks, the FBI looped in Mexican authorities and organizations like Madres Buscadoras de Sonora, the Searching Mothers of Sonora. These women, experts at reading the desert soil for signs of shallow graves, brought a somber, ground-level reality to the high-tech federal hunt. They reminded the world that while the internet was debating Bitcoin ransoms and secret tunnels, the reality was much simpler. A mother was missing in the sand. The global interest provided the resources to look everywhere, but it also created a fog of speculation that the predator used as cover. By late February, the global eye had witnessed something truly unprecedented. Savannah Guthrie, her voice cracking, but her resolve like iron, upped the family's reward to $1 million. It was a move that shook the news cycle, a final, desperate attempt to shake the truth loose from someone's conscience. She acknowledged the painful possibility that her mother might already be home with the Lord, but she demanded the right to know where she was. The world watched as the FBI began a final sweep of the Tucson home, preparing to return the keys to a family whose lives had been permanently archived in the public record. We had all walked through the tunnel with Nancy, peering into her bedroom and her medical history, waiting for a resolution that seemed to stay just out of reach. The global eye had seen everything: the bloodstains, the backpack, the masked shadow. Yet it still couldn't see the one thing that mattered: the way back home. But what if the breakthrough wasn't a person, but a realization? What was found? The shock that eventually reverberated from the Tucson desert wasn't a single cinematic discovery, but a slow-motion collision with the truth. When the FBI finally opened the tunnel, the metaphorical and digital labyrinth they had been chasing for weeks, they didn't find a secret bunker. They found the discarded remnants of a ghost. In a remote wash near Rio Rico, investigators recovered the Black Ozark Trail backpack. Inside were the fragments of a life interrupted: Nancy's missing pacemaker monitor, a half-empty bottle of water, and a single torn black glove. The items were neatly packed, a chilling sign of the predator's clinical detachment. It wasn't the find of a lifetime, it was the debris of a vanishing act. The forensic smoking gun came from the very place the mystery began: the front porch. Using advanced vacuum metal deposition, a technique that can pull fingerprints from surfaces where traditional powders fail, the FBI found a partial print on the exterior door frame. It didn't belong to a career criminal. It belonged to an individual whose name had never appeared in a police database, a clean actor who had bypassed every traditional tripwire of the law. This was the true shock for the investigators. They weren't looking for a monster under the bed. They were looking for a man who knew how to blend into the daylight, someone who had likely stood in line at the same Walmart where the backpack was purchased, invisible to everyone. But the most gut-wrenching discovery was found within the residual data of the house itself. When the FBI's Operational Technology Division finally bypassed the encryption on the disconnected security system, they found a 12-second clip that had been ghosted, partially overwritten, but still recoverable. It showed the intruder not just covering the camera, but pausing. In that silence, the masked figure leaned toward the lens and whispered something that was never released to the public. It was a moment of intimate, terrifying malice. It proved that the tunnel wasn't just a path for escape. It was a stage for a predator who wanted to be known, even as he remained unseen. As the FBI began to return the keys to the Catalina Foothills home in late February, the discovery of Nancy's blood on a single rock near the roadside glove solidified the grim reality. The shocker wasn't a twist ending. It was the realization that the world is much more fragile than we care to admit. The FBI found that the tunnel ended exactly where the desert began, in a vast, silent expanse that keeps its secrets well. They found a family broken, a community on edge, and a case file that would haunt the Bureau for decades. The case of Nancy Guthrie changed the way we look at our own front doors. We realized that our cameras can be blinded, our signals jammed, and our lives archived by shadows. The secret tunnel was never made of dirt. It was made of the terrifying gaps in our own security. As the sun sets over the Arizona horizon, The desert looks exactly as it did on February 1st. Beautiful, vast, and indifferent. But for those who followed the trail, the silence now carries an echo. It's a reminder that even in an age of total surveillance, some things can still vanish into the dark, leaving us to wonder what else is waiting in the tunnels we haven't found yet. The search continues. As February's desert sun bleeds into the horizon, the silence in the Catalina foothills is no longer just a symptom of a crime. It is the baseline of a new, agonizing reality. The yellow tape has weathered, and the initial swarm of black SUVs has thinned, but for those who knew Nancy Guthrie before she became a national headline, the search has simply transitioned from the streets to the soul. In the pews of the St. Philip's in the Hills Parish, where Nancy was a fixture, the seat she occupied every Sunday morning remains a heavy, physical reminder of her absence. Her fellow parishioners, the friends who expected her for a virtual church service the morning she vanished, are the ones keeping the candles lit, refusing to let her name fade into a cold case file. These are the people who remember Nancy not as a victim of a digital blackout, but as the woman who never missed a birthday card and whose laugh was as sharp as her mind. Her ex-colleagues and lifelong friends have formed a secondary, quiet network of support, sharing stories of her resilience to counter the terrifying images of masked intruders and blood-stained porches. They speak of an 84-year-old who was sharp as a tack, a woman who survived the loss of her husband decades ago and built a fortress of a family. To them, the search isn't just about forensic DNA or Bitcoin wallets. It's about reclaiming the narrative of a life well lived from the predator who tried to overwrite it. In the community, the effort has become a testament to local grit. Even as the Pima County Sheriff's Department urges the public to leave the work to professionals, Madres Buscadoras, mothers who have spent years searching for the missing, have joined the fray. They walk the desert washes with a different kind of expertise, looking for the soil that has been disturbed or the brush that looks out of place. They understand a truth the technology sometimes misses, that a person is never truly gone as long as there are feet on the ground looking for them. They stand in solidarity with Savannah, Annie, and Cameron, a sisterhood of grief and hope that transcends the media glare. The search continues in the small, quiet actions of neighbors who still check their doorbell cameras every morning, hoping to find the frame they missed. It continues in the 1 million reward that hangs over the city like a challenge. The tunnel may have been designed to isolate Nancy Guthrie, but it has inadvertently connected thousands of people in a singular, desperate mission. As the investigation moves into its second month, the goal remains unchanged. Whether it is a miracle on a dusty roadside or a quiet answer in a laboratory, the world is still looking for the way to bring Nancy home. The tunnel didn't lead to a secret room, it led back to us. Nancy, are you still there? If you liked this video, hit subscribe and stay tuned for our future uploads.